seriously? Are you... My dog is crying. Good morning again and welcome back to my kitchen. Ta-da! So here's what happened. Last week I made cinnamon rolls and I was going to show you how to shape the dough when I pulled it out of the oven. And I ended the video with a big old thing of dough. And the reason why we ended there was because the overhead camera that was going to record me actually shaping the rolls, it died. The batteries died. So I went on and made the rolls and thought that I had great video footage and lots of fun and interesting little tidbits that I was dropping along the way. None of it recorded. None of it. So here's what we're going to do. I am going to make a fast brioche dough. And we're going to use that brioche dough to do two things. We're going to make some donuts and we're going to use the other half to make cinnamon rolls. Here we go. Let's make some brioche dough. It's going to be fast. We're going to take 2 3/4 cups of flour, also known as 326 grams. I've already pre-weighed everything. Everything is done by weight. So that's going to go directly into the bowl of our stand mixer. Now you'll notice that a whole lot of this stuff is just getting put together at the same time, which is fun. Into that we'll add our Baker's Special dry milk. 35 grams, 3 tablespoons of sugar, 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt, right there, 1 full tablespoon of instant yeast. Now, here's the thing about the instant yeast. The more butter, the more sugar that you add to a dough to make it enriched, the more yeast you have to add, because sugar and butter are both going to retard the action of the yeast. It's not going to grow as fast. It's not going to multiply, eat sugar, poop out carbon dioxide. So the thing that's going to give our rolls lift will be less active the more butter and sugar we add. So whenever you have a sweeter dough, you'll always have more yeast. In an unenriched dough, you would never use a whole tablespoon of yeast. You would use like 2 1/4 teaspoons. So this is a lot. This is more by like about 35% more yeast. We're going to add 3 eggs. Now, in the recipe, it says the eggs need to be cold directly from the refrigerator. Quarter cup of water. Oh, man. Did you see that? Did you see that? I just cracked it on the edge. I know better than that. I'm rushing and not thinking about what I'm doing. Goodness gracious, what a mess. There's not a whole lot of water in this bread recipe because a bunch of the moisture is going to be coming from the eggs. Now, those egg yolks have a lot of fat, but we're also going to be adding just a ton of butter. Now, the first thing that you do after you've added all of these dry ingredients, the water and the eggs, is we're going to mix this on low temperature, on low speed. Hold on, let me move the stand mixer over so you can see it. Take our dough hook. We're going to mix this on low speed for about 5 minutes. So after about 5 minutes of mixing, here's what we got. This nice, smooth, very pliable dough. Right now there's still chunks of the powdered milk, which I did not sift before I put it in. Really should have sifted it before I put it in because there are some lumps there. So before I start adding butter, I'm just going to use my fingers and kind of powder it, squish it in. You know, like that? When I was a kid, my grandma used to call them the crunchies. Because there's almost always crunchies in your flour. So you just kind of feel it out. It's pretty sticky right now. We haven't even started adding the butter. We have to add a lot of butter to this recipe. All right, no more crunchies. Now, the recipe calls for 10 tablespoons. The 142 grams of butter are at room temperature. So it's soft, but not melted. This isn't one of those times where you can just pop it in the microwave. You actually have to let it get soft. And we're going to add it about 2 tablespoons at a time. And the fun thing about this recipe is that it takes 15 minutes to knead. So much more time than almost any other bread because of the addition of the butter. Such a sticky mess. Now here's the fun thing about brioche dough. Because it has such a high butter content, it rises slightly differently than a regular bread does. It has a 2-stage rise. We're going to let it rise at room temperature for about an hour. And we're going to cover it up and we're going to stick it in the fridge for an additional 2 hours. 1 hour at room temperature, and we'll start to see some yeast action going on. The second 2 hours, we're going to let it rise in the fridge. Very slow, chilled fermentation. Now what that's going to do is it's going to allow some flavor to develop, and it's going to slow the action of the yeast. It's also going to make the dough cold enough for us to actually work with and shape it. So we'll see how this turns out. We are doing something of an experiment because when I started this recipe, I thought I had AP flour. I did, but evidently someone in my family decided to make some gravy with flour and you use it all up. So instead of flour, I'm using today a gluten-free blend by King Arthur Flour. I got this because my mom is allergic to gluten. She has a terrible reaction. She breaks out in hives whenever she eats bread. So I promised her that I would try to figure out how to make some gluten-free cinnamon rolls. So anyway, this is gluten-free stuff. We'll see how it turns out. I don't know. We'll see. It doesn't have the gluten that would provide the normal structure. Instead, it uses a blend of xanthan gum and some rice bran flour. And what do you want now? She's so weird. The dough just came out, and now we are going to check to see how it's doing. It's light. Fluffy, very, very yeasty. Now it's time to stick it in the fridge. Two hours. We got 2 sets of dough. We have our original dough. This was made with the gluten-free flour. It is an unusual color, kind of a pale brown. It's still very light, still very fluffy. It has not risen anymore at all, even though it smells very, very yeasty. Our second batch of dough, which I made using a croissant-style lamination, I'm going to turn these into some donuts because I went out and got some flour. So since I got regular flour, I made a regular batch of dough. I just made it using the brioche style with the same thing that I did before, but this time I used regular flour instead of the gluten-free stuff. So I'll have something to compare it to. I really wish right now you guys were here. I mean, not in my house. And not in my house. Okay, I don't wish you were here. Oh, a couple of you. I kind of wish you were here. Well, whatever. Anywho, so I made a croissant-style brioche dough. In the center of this dough is folded like an envelope. Right in the middle, there is a thick piece of butter, a long sheet of butter. It's a rectangle, and the dough is wrapped around that. We're gonna roll this flat and then fold it over a couple different times, and that's how you laminate the dough. When we're talking about laminate, we're talking about layers. A thin layer of butter, a thin layer of flour, a thin layer of butter, a thin layer of flour, or not flour, but dough. And what happens is as it bakes, the butter melts, creates steam, and creates a nice fluffy layer. So we'll see how that turns out. A little bit of experimentation. This is room temperature butter. It's right at 1/3 cup. And then we have a cup of white sugar. No molasses to turn it brown. And no brown sugar. It would be so much better with brown sugar because the molasses gives it a whole lot of that rich flavor, that umami that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and cream this. You're going to run your stand mixer at medium speed until the butter starts to become light and fluffy. What's happening is the sugar is actually cutting in to the fat molecules, the fat globules. And as it does that, it's incorporating air, making it lighter and fluffier. It'll turn lighter in color. Your butter will start off yellow and it will get lighter in color. When it starts getting lighter, pick up the speed. This step is called creaming. No. Don't do that. This step is called creaming, and it is absolutely fundamental to making cookies and a number of quick breads. So I have my creamed sugar. We'll grab a spatula. It should be light and fluffy. We've cut into the butter. It's a little bit thicker than a paste, and it's a little dry. You don't want it too wet. Because if it is too wet, then what will happen is that it's going to melt out too fast inside of your cinnamon rolls and turn them greasy. To that, I'm going to add 2.5 tablespoons. That's a lot. 2.5 tablespoons of cinnamon. This is Saigon cinnamon. It's not the good stuff. The good stuff comes from Sri Lanka. It's called Ceylon cinnamon. And Ceylon cinnamon is some of the best in the world. It's very, very mild, has this unbelievably kind of almost a gentle flavor. Oh, it's so good. Now, of course, what would life be if I had vanilla? I don't have any vanilla. But I do happen to have a little bit of coffee extract, and I thought, I love coffee. A little coffee-flavored extract will work well. Fun fact, the tops of almost all extracts, almost all of them, the lid, if you fill it up to the top, is half a teaspoon. Fun story. True story. I got 2 more ingredients that we're going to add to our filling. Ooh, that smells really good. I don't know if I have any dried coffee. Some powdered coffee would be great in there. We're going to give it a dash of salt. Now, I'm not going to use kosher salt because it's too coarse. This is a fine ground sea salt. Just a little dash of that. On the recipe, it calls for like 1/8 of a teaspoon. Dude, if you can find 1/8 of a teaspoon and measure it accurately, I'll be impressed. This is a dash. Don't go too heavy. We don't want it salty. Last thing we're going to add is some nutmeg. A little bit of freshly shaved nutmeg right inside. Freshly shaved nutmeg has such a different flavor than the stuff that you get out of the can. Now this is what a nutmeg looks like. These are wonderful. One fresh nutmeg. A nutmeg grinder, they're not that expensive. I don't like them too much, nutmeg grinders, because they really only have one purpose in the kitchen. They take up space and they don't come together easily. Get over there, guy. What's wrong with you? I've got a little bit of fresh nutmeg. I've got 2.5 tablespoons of cinnamon. I've got some brown sugar. And I've got a good bit of butter. just a third of a cup. Works out to be about 6 tablespoons. The smell is really, really good. Better than I expected. All right. So we got our filling ready to go. Now, finally, comes the point that I've been waiting for, where we get to actually shape our cinnamon rolls. Real important that your surface where you're going to be shaping your rolls is completely dry. Now what we're going to do, it's got a little bit of action going on, a little bit of air bubbles. So we're going to very gently start off by moving it into a basic rectangle. It's not nearly as sticky as it was before now that it's nice and chilled. What we're looking for is a rectangle. Oh, this dough is so soft. Just like that. I want to shape it a little bit more into a clear rectangle. And I'm going to do that by kind of just picking up some of the dough, moving it over. This dough is so, I think it's because it's gluten-free flour. It is so much easier to work with. It's not fighting me the way normally dough would because of the gluten. Well, obviously no gluten, right? Gluten-free. Not too worried about the back because I'm going to be rolling it forward. All right, in goes the filling. And there is a lot of it. No. In goes the filling. Man, there's a good chunk of it. We're going to just stick it right in there like that. Just a little bit more filling. I'm going to waste that. Now, you're going to take your rolling pin, just roll it in just lightly. Now here's the way I prefer to do it. I prefer to roll it towards me using a bench scraper because otherwise what tends to happen is it's going to stick to the counter. It's going to stick to your work surface. Use the bench scraper and I don't have to worry about that. I'm going to start at the edge. And if you see what I'm doing, I'm using the bench scraper to help me to shape. Now this dough is very, very soft. It's the softest dough I think I've ever worked with making this kind of a product. And it tears pretty easy. That's okay. Now before I move any further, I'm just going to kind of seal the seam with my fingers very lightly. Any little cracks, I'm going to kind of cover it with my fingers. Beautiful. Looks nice. We'll sprinkle of flour on the outside just to help with the next step. So that it moves nice and easy. Okay, I've got a pretty even log. I'm going to try to cut it right down the center. I'm going to line up my two edges. Find the middle. And go again. Line up those edges. Line up those edges. Now here's the part that's always sad, because we're going to lose a little bit. We'll get rid of you. Oh, you're pretty. But we're not going to eat you. Now I got a question. A choice. I have a choice. If I cut them right down the center, I'll get 8 huge cinnamon rolls. I mean, huge. I could try cutting them into thirds, like that. Then I'm going to get 12 much smaller ones. What to do? I think we'll go with the 12 slightly smaller ones. All right, there we go. Now, we'll bake him up too, just because, why not? Don't want him to feel left out. In a commercial kitchen, we would let these rise in an actual proofer, something that controls temperature between 90 and 100 degrees and keeps it at a steady 85% humidity. Now, we don't have a commercial proofer, so we're going to set one up. We're going to make a proofer by getting a little water boiling. We're going to put it in the bottom of the oven, and then that'll create enough steam to keep the interior of our oven, which is turned off, at about 90 degrees and about 85% humidity for about an hour and a half, which should be enough time for these guys to rise. And while the water is warming up, we'll go ahead and set up our pan. Now for the pan, I'm going to be using parchment paper. One nice big long sheet of parchment paper. I'm going to let it sit up off the sides because I'm kind of... They're going to grow. Now let's talk for a second about our other batch of brioche dough. For these guys, we're going to make 2 different things. One thing we're going to do is we're going to make some tiny little brioche muffins. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to make some donuts. Now, this has been sitting in the fridge for about an hour and a half after I made it. Because this is laminated dough, and there's a thick slab of butter right in the center, is we have to roll this out. So with just a little bit of flour, just a little bit now, don't go crazy. Seam side up. You have to go slow. If you roll out laminated dough too fast, the butter, which is inside, is going to burst through. Then then you won't end up with laminated dough. You'll end up with something that's disgusting that no one will want to eat because it'll be greasy. And you certainly will die alone. So don't do that. Go gentle. And when you get to the end, you can actually see the butter starting to bulge. That's when you flip. You turn, you go the other direction. See how I'm not going all the way to the edge? I'm stopping right before I get to that edge. So you'll notice that what we started off with, when we started rolling, was small, like that big. We've tripled in size. And we've kept our rectangle shape, which is important. All right, then we're going to fold over. Fold that way. Ooh, see that little bit of butter? See that little bit of butter trying to break through right there? We're going to hide him because I don't want him breaking through. Now we're going to roll it this way. Of all the doughs that we make in pastry, this is the one that I think it takes the longest time to get a hand for. Mainly because the tendency is to want to roll it hard and fast, get it done quicker. So we've folded it once in the initial proof. We have folded it twice. Now I'm getting ready for the third fold. Again, envelope fold. Dog hair. This is actually, I think, the hardest part because now enough gluten has developed from all these folds that we've done that as I'm pushing it, the dough is pulling back. The gluten is fully developed. Flip it over. Let's give it a little bit more flour because we've got some moisture here, probably from the butter. And the flour is just going to absorb some of that moisture, make it less likely that the dough will tear. Because tearing is what we're worried about. If it starts to tear, butter gets out. If butter gets out, the dough is ruined. I think I'm going to let this get cold again.
I'm on my manual because my family got sick of me having everything else out, so I had to put everything away. But this is the cinnamon rolls. They've been sitting in the oven for about 2.5 hours. And now what I'm going to do is toss them in the oven at about 400 degrees. It's preheating right now. As soon as it's done preheating, we'll pop them in there. They cook for a very short period of time, just like 15 minutes or so. Ooh, look at those babies. Let's get an overhead shot.
Seriously? Are you... My dog is crying. What is it? Come here. Come here. Come on. You need to say hello? You need to say... Come here. How about... Nobody can see you down there. Well, I mean, I guess they probably could. I'm not trying to chase. You stink. Come here. Come here.